Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for being here for this session. We're really excited to introduce our wonderful panelists. And just to start us off, panelists, if y'all could just introduce yourselves, your pronouns, and a bit of the work that you do in the community to get us started.
I'll go first. Hi, everybody. My name is Taylor Alexander. I use they, them, or she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director and co-founder of Southern Fried Queer Pride, which is a queer and trans arts and community organization uplifting Southern Black and Brown queer and trans folks. I'm also the founding mother of House of Alexander, a drag family here in Atlanta. I'm a musician, proud parent of too many cats, and I'm so happy to be here today.
Hi, I am Cortez Wright. I use pronouns they, them, theirs. I'm the development and marketing manager at the Southern Center for Human Rights for my daytime work. And then all the other times I am organizing as a board member for Southern Fried Queer Pride and also assisting in a few other local projects around Atlanta.
All right. Hey, y'all. Jessie Pratt Lopez, she, her, ella pronouns. So I'm a photographer, activist, and organizer. I'm also a member of Southern Fried Queer Pride, and I've worked with other organizations such as Community Estrella, and I'm also starting my own housing project for trans and gender nonconforming people in Atlanta. So, yeah.
Awesome, and welcome everybody. My name is Jeffrey Martin. I am a member of The Intersection who will be moderating this illustrious panel today. The Intersection is a collective committed to bridging the gap between Black, queer, trans, and cishet communities. And it's a joy just to be here with you all talking about the importance of why Southern Black trans lives mattering in Atlanta. I think just a really good question to get us started off. Recently reading Angelica Ross's interview with Raquel Willis, she said, we're on the heels of another revolution. What does that mean for you?
I feel like in terms of revolution, when we talk about revolution in queer and trans communities, we typically think about Stonewall. You know, that's like the hallmark revolution we reference. But I think we're in a revolution, you know, the past few years we've had this kind of tipping point in terms of trans representation, you know, probably since like 2016, 2017, where, you know, we have all this visibility, but we also have more violence enacted upon our communities because of this visibility. There's this great documentary on Netflix called Disclosure, which kind of like talks about that right now. But I think in terms of the revolution that Angelica talks about is that we're not only having a revolution from within the community, but also with the communities that we're attached to. So like the Black cishet community, which, you know, largely enacts a lot of violence upon Black trans folks, specifically Black trans women. And I think that, along with Black Lives Matter and all the political unrest that we have right now, is kind of creating this bubble of revolutionary potential.
And to echo / follow up after Taylor, I think it was in 2014, I believe, for Time Magazine, where Laverne Cox was featured. And I think the headline of the article was The Trans Tipping Point. And so it was about, like 6 years ago that there is this sort of assumption that because of increased representation of trans people in the media, that the realities, the lived experiences of trans people were going to be changing and improving significantly. And I think over the past 6 years, what we've seen is that while there have been some improvement, we also find ourselves in a particular time under a particular political administration where a lot of those advances have been rolled back, and the most marginalized, so as Taylor mentioned, Black trans women, trans women of color, are once again experiencing the brunt of both systemic and community and interpersonal violence. And so I think just really thinking about that piece, I think all of those things are sort of culminating in this moment where there is a lot of energy around projects that are led by trans people and projects that are sort of reimagining what it looks like to create sustainable change in our country and also globally.
Okay, echoing off of that, yeah, I think it's very important that we consider and look at history, because I feel like a lot of folks are repeating the same mistakes because we're not attacking the structural issues. And visibility is one of those things that's a double-edged sword, that because of the advent of our generation, social media, and the visibility that comes with that, I feel like trans folks are able to have that, but the structural changes aren't coming about along with that. And I feel like that's the intersection that we're seeing right now, that a lot of people, because of the visibility, they're saying like gender is over, we did it, there's trans folks are in the media, non-binary folks are starting to be in the media, but like we still see like Black trans women being killed every day, and we still see marginalized communities in the same situations that they've been for decades. We still see the very high rates of homelessness in the trans community. So I feel like before we jump the gun, and saying that, I feel like saying that this revolution is, a lot of folks, in the gay community, have like, oh, we got gay marriage, stuff like that, but we're leaving folks behind and we're not attacking those structural issues that really will, because we can't work within the system that has continuously oppressed us. So yeah, it's a lot to think about. But I think it's important to take advantage of this opportunity and look back at history.
I think.
Sorry, Cortez, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, no problem. Well, I think also just thinking about history and visibility, what is so often the case is that visibility is actually not a problem for Black and brown trans folks. A lot of us, especially Black trans women, are hyper visible. And so I think that framing the conversation in terms of visibility being the thing that really shifts culture is sort of a non-starter to begin with, because for so many people, the issue is not whether or not they're visible, is whether they can be safe while they are visible.
Right. I mean, you're even touching on, this is the point I was just trying to make. You're touching on the points of what a lot of folks felt once we had President Obama as president, that we live in this post-racial societal world. It's kind of bringing up that parallel, but more, I think, in a niche space when it's coming down to our community and where it intersects with race, class, sexism, etc.
Yeah, for sure. And I know a lot of people have their feelings about Trump, but I will say that one of the things that I think is, one of the things that the Trump administration has highlighted is that so much of the systemic violence that people face in this country is not necessarily connected to who's in power, but what those systems that they take control of look like. And so many of the things that Trump has been able to do were policies that were either half started or fully started under Obama. So many of the problems of immigration right now are problems that were started and sped up over Obama. And so I think when people sort of try to treat the Obama administration as, like you mentioned, like this was this time that we were living in this sort of utopian world where all of the positive change was possible. And now we're in this Trump administration dystopia where all of our worst fears are coming true. I think it misses that for so many people, there hasn't been a drastic change to their material reality. For so many people, they've always been at the bottom, boots on necks, losing their homes, losing their jobs, not being able to really support themselves or their families.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I was watching, I forgot the name of the documentary, but like that's historically been like a theme of like even that the visibility of very successful like folks of color and like trans folks, like people get this skewed perception that that's the reality for like everyone, and it's like that's the reality for like 0.000 like 8%. The reality of like everyone else is like poor and struggling, and like we, yeah, I feel like visibility is sometimes, you know, yeah, like I said, a double-edged sword. So thank you for mentioning that, Cortez.
Yeah. And I think, all three of y'all, given the things that are happening in the city and in the region, everybody on this call has gotten a lot of recent visibility because of their work and the funds and just the overall political work that y'all do.
So the word revolution is tossed around a lot in most spaces that I'm in. And I think for a lot of us, it's a buzzword that we've never really like embraced and experienced the full vision of what a revolution is. People are like, oh, revolution is reparations, or revolution is, housing for all, revolution is this and that. And that can be a part of revolution, but we have never experienced a revolution. We've experienced uprisings, we've experienced, some somewhat radical changes in society, but as a revolution, I think to have a full revolution, it needs to be radical, which means it needs to be from the root. And a lot of the root causes of a lot of our oppressions, is capitalism, is white supremacy. And I feel like we're in this time right now where it feels like white supremacy and capitalism are being challenged, but at a rate where it could equal a revolution, I'm not exactly sure. But I think right now, at least with the work that I do with SFQP and seeing the work that's being done on the ground, I think that a lot of revolutionary ideas of, mutual aid, revolutionary ideas of housing that queer and trans people create for ourselves, revolutionary ideas around who's in power and who has control, and questioning these, systems that we have never been fulfilled by. I think those are some radical aspects and revolutionary aspects that are happening right now. But I think we still have a while to go before meeting what we really see as a revolution.
Yeah, I feel like I actually, when I came to Atlanta, I encountered, the community of queer and trans folks that kind of radicalized me into the person that I am today. And a lot of the folks were from SFQP. And everything that Taylor mentioned, that mutual aid, all these values of mutual resistance against these systems, like that's how I was able to find community and able to survive. And, I owe everything to y'all. So I'm so thankful. So yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So I think like I mentioned, people feeling energized right now. And I think what that energy has turned into is that a lot of people with resources are sharing more of those resources. And it's one of those things where it's both amazing because you have, an example of SFQP, we're fundraising for a community space, and, people are actually giving up their dollars. With Jesse, we're organizing for a homeless project, and people have significantly given up their dollars. Mm-hmm. But it also makes you wonder, like, where was all this support before this particular moment? Where, for the past, almost month now, we've seen consistent uprisings across the country due to the deaths of Black people at the hands of police, and also due to the deaths of trans folks at the hands of members of our community. And we haven't, like, that same sort of financial support did not exist before this moment. And so I wouldn't say that it is, I don't want to say that it's performative. I want to say that these are the people who are going to be here for the long term. But at the same time, I'm realistic. And I recognize that, for some people, their idea of what it means to contribute to change is to give up a few dollars and then go about the rest of their day and the rest of their lives how they normally would, because it doesn't force them to really examine the implicit biases that we as people in this country and on this planet manifest every single day. It doesn't require them to really change or transform themselves in service of liberation and in service of community. I am excited at the increased level of support that so many people are getting right now, and I'm happy to see so many people taking advantage of that and really getting so many grassroots projects off the ground in this moment. But I'm also wondering what that support will look like in, 3 months or 6 months or a year from now.
And so it's really interesting that y'all are bringing up this concept of reparations, quote unquote, and how easy it is to give it, but also how it separates you from the true issues. Like Taylor, you raised almost $100,000 in a month or so. Jesse, you're getting close to 3 million. Cortez, you're at the helm of helping all these organizations figure out what their next moves are. And I also just kind of stepping out of the moderator space, it is really easy to give money to something for one time. What does it look like to continue? And this is the question too. What does it look like to continue to put Black trans lives matter at the forefront of the Black Lives Matters movement, knowing that that is our most vulnerable group, given all of the things that y'all just mentioned? So cool, the money's here. What does it look like beyond just the funding?
I think there needs to be a cultural shift, because as of right now, when people say Black Lives Matter, I feel like the majority of them, especially, and I'm talking about as a Black person in a Black community, I don't feel like Black trans lives are being considered by the majority of the movement. And I don't think we are being uplifted by a majority of the movement. We actually did a mural that said Black Trans Lives Matter here in Atlanta near Krog Street. I drove by maybe a day or two ago, and somebody had just scratched out trans. So now it just says Black Lives Matter. So I don't believe that we can really invest in this movement unless it's really for all Black lives, period. So Black trans lives, Black poor people, Black people who don't fit the narrative of the good Black person, When we say all Black lives matter, I mean, the Black undocumented people, the Black disabled people, the Black people who went to jail, probably did some crimes, and are, because of recidivism, are back in jail. So I think before we kind of go forward into this societal shift, there needs to be a cultural shift and understanding what liberation means. And that means liberation not only for myself, but for you, for people who don't look like us, for people who don't fit that good narrative. And I think, part of my experience with this is that, so many times we see so many Black cis het men killed by police, and I feel, drawn to protest because of that. But also then I think, would that Black man stand up for the Black trans women who are murdered? Would they, stand up if my queer ass was murdered by police? And I think there needs to, as much as there needs to be a societal shift, there needs to be kind of a cultural shift of inclusion and understanding where we're heading in this movement. Because if we're not united and on the same kind of front, we're never going to reach that, point of liberation. And I think in talking about the topic that we just talked about in terms of people giving money and then kind of disappearing, I think, it's very easy for people with privilege to give coin, to give money, but to give up power and resources and privilege is something that I think is the next step. And I think we're slowly but surely getting there, but some people are still clutching onto it like it's all they have.
And not to interrupt, look at what happened with Halle Berry. Literally, role that she wrote for, and I was literally listening to 102.9, it was the old school station.
Oh God.
One of the DJ folks, they were getting upset that Halle got called out and were basically doing transphobic things on the airways. It's oh, well, he, she, they, them, and it was completely skipping over the notion that maybe you should have a trans person playing a trans role, even though you're writing a movie about, even though you're a cishet person writing about a trans movie. It was very, on some of it, it's like, I don't know, like on certain levels, even just from that media example, I don't think people really realize how much they have to work through on that cultural side. But then it's also, like you said, from the power side, it took Halle Berry a whole weekend for her to realize that that is not what she should have been doing. So I think what you're talking about from the cultural standpoint, just looking at something that was recently on Black Twitter, like that's spot on. Sorry not to interrupt, but I do think
No, that's completely accurate, and I think it's because a lot of us in this movement are individualistic. So Black men, Black cishet men, as long as they're good, they're good. They don't give a fuck about Black cis women half the time. They don't give a care about, you know, Black trans people. And I think until we break that mold and really understand that we are all people who enact harm and exclusion towards other people, we all do, point blank period. There's nobody who is completely and fully inclusive. We're all working to tear down these notions of white supremacy and exclusion that we all have been ingrained in. So as much as, you know, I want to be in movement with those people who were on 102.9, I also know they share a mentality that a lot of Black cis people have. And that exact mentality is why we have Black trans women being killed by Black cis men and nobody wanting to uplift their name. So it's a whole, you know, one time we're calling out, you know, white folks, and then other times we're talking about Black cis people, and it's a constant battle, you know. Think about, you know, so many like Black women like Toyin who have been like lost recently in this movement. You know, as much as we're fighting against white supremacy, we're also fighting against, you know, Black patriarchal standards and exclusion within the movement. It's a whole cycle, but I'll stop talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you like mentioned the hot ass mess that was Halle Berry's interview, and I'm just thinking like someone pitched. There were multiple things. Like someone pitched this project to Halle Berry. Halle Berry was thinking about doing the project, and even discussing her thinking about doing this project was engaging in some trans antagonism and how she talked about the project. And so there's just so many areas where there are like so many steps for someone possibly who knew better to be like, hey, Holly, maybe this isn't for you. Or, you know, maybe if the person who pitched the film was a trans person, you know, who knows? Like, there's just so many areas of that just make you like go like, like did no one really like think this fully through? Like, wasn't the ScarJo situation just like, you know, 2-3 years ago that we were talking about ScarJo? Like I'm not saying that ScarJo and Halle Berry are, you know, up there on the same level, but I feel like Holly hears about ScarJo, so I'm just confused. But yeah, and just to talk about history again, I think it is, like, it's amazing to look at this movement, Black Lives Matter, that, you know, was started by 3 Black women, queer folks, and to see the ways in which it has shifted over time and changed over time, and what the ultimate message ends up being for people, just in like everyday conversations. You know, you have white people thinking that we're trying to, you know, make a Black supremacist state and destroy all the whites, which, you know, I mean, we can talk about it, but that's, you know, that's not what's happening. And then we have, you know, so many people who think that when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we're only talking about police brutality against Black men. We're not talking about police brutality against Black women or against, you know, Black non-binary folks or Black queer folks or Black trans folks. We're not talking about other kinds of systemic violence against Black people. What we're specifically talking about is the police killing Black men. And like the impetus for BLM's formation was George Zimmerman, who's not a black man, who's not a police officer, even though he was acting as one, killing a black, teenager. And it's interesting the ways in which movements and sort of these grand ideas can get disconnected from the people who really push them, and disconnected from what those people thought the movement was going to look like. And so it's hard to be in conversations with people where we talk about Black Lives Matter and have folks not understanding why we would be talking about queer issues or trans issues or disability or immigration or housing or so on and so forth, when so many of these things intersect and overlap and exist at the same time.
Yeah, everything that y'all said. I feel like the cultural shift, like Taylor was saying, is just as important as the structural shift, because the cultural shift would necessitate, that the centuries of colonization be unlearned, and all that colonization that that has brainwashed all of our mindsets to be unlearned. And that's so important for the movement in general. And as a non-Black person, Latinx person who's mestiza, white and indigenous, I in my community, I say all the time how anti-Blackness within the Latinx community permeates all aspects of the culture, and how folks like during this movement right now, are kind of detracting from it by making statements like about Vanessa Guillen, like saying, "Oh, where's the energy for Vanessa that there is for George Floyd?" It's like, because of colonization, we don't understand. A lot of folks don't understand that all these things are interconnected. That all of our liberation are interconnected. So like if all of us are, like Taylor said, united in fighting for Black lives and Black trans lives, then the world would be a better place for all of us, for Latinx folks, for everyone. So I feel like, yeah, there's a lot of division within the communities and outside of the communities, because people, they don't use their privileges that they have, and when they do, it's performative or one time, and they're not actually, looking at how they're perpetuating harm because of colonization, and how they're contributing to this culture that perpetuates this violence. Like abolishing prisons would also mean abolishing ICE, which terrorizes Black and brown folks, Latinx folks, trans folks. So it's a lot that we need to undo before we can completely move forward. I feel like part of moving forward is undoing a lot of the stuff, and that's a lot of intra-community work, and it takes a lot of partnerships and it takes a lot from folks. So I think folks who have more privilege need to just use that in order to call folks out, call folks in, and contribute to these movements how they can with their time, their resources, their skills. If we move away from that individualistic mindset, we can see that we all have something to offer, to the movement.
And I think it's also too, you can bring up the aspects of defunding the police and what that means. That's a budgetary exercise. We do budgetary allocations all the time. We just had to do that at the state level. It's just something that it's one of those things of also informing people of the terminology so that they can understand and not just react to the words. I did have, Cortez, I know you jumped in. I did have one question, but this was different from what Jesse was talking about. I just wanted to give some space because I know you wanted to.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that Jesse sort of highlighted something that is very pervasive in so many movements, and it's this idea that Black folks need to show up with our full energy for every single other person in the world. And people just point blank don't do that for us. Like, folks don't show up for Black movement work in the same way that they do for everything else. And so it's such a disingenuous call to action for people to even like form that question of where was this energy for X, Y, and Z? When the reality is that Black folks show up for every fucking body. You know, every single movement you can think of, there have been Black people at the forefront, shifting culture, shifting minds, changing institutions. And so, yeah, it's such a disingenuous question to even think to ask people.
So on that note, you know, I have the privilege of just seeing all of y'all's amazing work in the community. What do the future of Black trans folks in Atlanta and in our region look like with y'all's work?
I think that the future of Atlanta Black trans folks looks a lot more free and liberated. I think more safety nets and um, more support in general. You know, there's not a lot of organizations or spaces for Black trans people to just exist and to like catch them when they fall into the pitfalls of, you know, capitalism, homelessness, XYZ. I think yeah, I think the future of Black trans people in Atlanta is just more free. And I think, you know, between the work of Snapco, between the work of Song, between the work that Jesse's doing, between the work that SFQP is doing, between the work of Someone Cares, THAP, you know, so many groups that are like getting the attention that we rightfully deserve right now. I think that we're looking at a trans community here in Atlanta that is getting more support than we've ever had before in Atlanta. And I hope to see that momentum continue outside of the months of May and June. You know, these groups, these people have existed outside of this time period. And I think that with these resources, we're able to create for a bigger, better, brighter future.
You know, I've been organizing for a while now in Atlanta for over a decade. And I think one of the things that has always been amazing to me is the way in which Black trans folks in Atlanta continue to support each other and uplift each other for new projects that come along. I think so often a lot of what people want to do ends up not being very sustainable because, you know, when you're a marginalized body trying to do work to change culture and community, and you're struggling to figure out how you're going to have your next meal or where you're going to sleep, things fall to the wayside sometimes. And I think it's been amazing to see like organizations like SSQP, to see the work that Jesse has been doing, to see the beginnings of the Trans Housing Atlanta program, to see the sustained nature of Someone Cares and of Song and the growth that all these organizations have had in Atlanta, and to see so many Black trans folks at the forefront in leadership of these organizations. It's like I don't have a very clear idea of what the future for Black trans Atlanta looks like, but what I will say is that I'm not like, it doesn't fill me with dread. Like, it fills me with hope at the potential for transformation. I'm excited to see what it looks like. And I'm excited to see what people do.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I feel like folks in Atlanta, especially in Black and Brown folks and trans folks, have been doing the work for so long. And I feel like all of the work is finally manifesting and coalescing. And I can't wait for that to happen. Like all the organizations that were mentioned, all the grassroots organizers, all the folks just from the community. And yeah, I just want to continue contributing to that movement, uplifting that movement, being part of it, using my platform to uplift folks and uplift the movement, because it takes a village. But yeah, I feel like unless we continue in investing in Black trans lives, Atlanta will not be successful. If we don't hold our leaders accountable, Atlanta, like Keisha Lance Bottoms, and continuing to not defund the police in Atlanta, we're going to continue seeing Black and brown folks incarcerated, killed, trans folks killed, until she invests in housing. We're going to continue seeing the housing crisis that we're seeing, especially in the Black and brown and trans communities. So I feel like there's so many great. I am very hopeful because there's a lot of great work that is working to undo all of this, and I think we're all here at the right time and place, and I think we need to keep doing what we're doing.
So, Juana, thanks for saying that. I have two more questions for y'all, and this is more so going towards Taylor and Jesse. The first question is, how has starting the funds impacted the scale of your work and purpose? So, Taylor, SFPP eventually being one of the first Black, queer, trans-owned spaces in Atlanta. Jesse, you in particular, thinking through what the trans housing initiative will look like in Atlanta from the major campaign that you work for. I just want y'all to just kind of answer that. So, one, how are the funds scaling the impact of your work and purpose? And the last question too, just to kind of end on, is how can folks listening help and support, and not just one time?
Period. So I'm honestly still speechless. We've tried fundraising for a space before, I think twice, and it never went over $800. I don't know what happened in June, white guilt, but something happened, and here we are almost at $100,000. And a lot of more people are, even within Atlanta, are just suddenly finding out that SFQP and some, that we exist, even though we've been doing stuff for 6 years, festivals, events, and whatnot. And a lot of people I think they're just now realizing that a lot of the things that they hold to be good hallmarks in a community can be found in SFQP. I see a lot of people drifting from mainstream pride to the kind of pride that we put on, which is beautiful. And I think it's just a wider recognition of Black and brown people doing the damn thing in Atlanta and across the South. If anybody wants to get involved, you can go to our website, southernfriedqueerpride.com, our Instagram at SFQP, our Twitter at SFQPATL, and Southern Fried Queer Pride on Facebook. But I think, right now it's kind of all up in the air because we are still within a pandemic. But hopefully, if we are even able to meet in person in 2021, we'll have a space that not only is owned by the people that look like us and experience life like us, but it will be a space that we can depend on this brick and mortar. A lot of our spaces are not owned, they're rented. So the minute, a developer comes in, the minute that something happens, a lot of us don't have the capital to just, keep moving from place to place. And a lot of the places that we have built community, whether, it's the bakery or Mammal Gallery or, several other like DIY spaces, won't survive. They are already gone. So I think that we're in a really beautiful period where a lot of our dreams and aspirations within the community are coming to fruition. And I can't wait to see what that will look like in 2021. So yeah, over to you, Jesse.
Oof. Yeah, I'm so excited to see all this happening. I honestly did not think, I don't see myself, my background is originally in photography, using documentary photography, because I think, there are so many things in this world that are overlooked, so many people that are overlooked, that aren't seen, and that aren't, given the same opportunities. And so photography is a way to see the world and see the people that I think are important in a way, which is, queer and trans folks of color, and all the folks in Atlanta. So when I was given this opportunity that I've been given with this project, started as just like a personal project of documenting the folks that matter to me, you know, these Black trans women that I just became close with. And so it's evolved into this opportunity to really invest in them and invest in continuing investing in Atlanta and the folks who have been doing the work. So I want, you know, like Taylor and, you know, SFQP, SNAPCO, THAP, all these organizations that have been for and by the people. So I think it's very important for Black and brown folks to, like Taylor said, own spaces, because, you know, all the spaces that, you know, are not owned. So without that, there's no real power there, because we're not able to do the things that we want to do. We don't have that autonomy. So with this housing project, I really want to bring together all the folks that have been doing the work and continue investing in that, so folks can get the resources that they need. Because housing is so important, and for trans folks, we face so much housing discrimination, face so much homelessness, and without having a home, you can't. It's hard to do anything else. It's hard, you know. Housing is a healthcare, is healthcare. So, you know, housing and community are, I think, go hand in hand as well. And I think, you know, connecting folks with community is also, it saves lives. So what SFQP is doing is so important. And, you know, being part of that is such a privilege. So yeah, I want to connect all of the, I guess that's my role, connecting all of these movements and all these communities, because we're stronger together.
And Jesse, just a quick follow-up to you. How can folks involve outside of just a one-time thing?
Right. So we're still in the planning stages of this project that started as the Homeless Black Trans Women Fund. It is now evolving into the Trans Housing Coalition. So folks can contact me on Instagram, jpratlopez.photos. In my Instagram, I have all my information, my website, my number, and my email, and a link tree with a GoFundMe, as well as other people you can directly contribute, Black and brown folks that you can directly contribute to, and other Black trans-led organizations that you can directly contribute to. Like I said, that's what my platform is for, using photography and to visibilize folks that deserve it and uplift these movements and bring them all together. So you can find, yeah, there's a link tree in my bio. And yeah, we need folks to be part of this project. You know, I would love to listen to any and all folks who are passionate about this work, you know. Yeah, so yeah, you can follow me there. Thanks.
Yeah, and on that note, folks, I'd like to thank everybody for attending. We will make sure to make all of the links, resources, and organizations that Jesse, Cortez, and Taylor mentioned available as well, so that y'all can do some more research and get engaged. But yes, thanks for attending the panel.